And now the WJTV 12 Runoff Debate Post Show starts now. And welcome to the WJTV 12 Runoff Debate Post Show. I'm Byron Brown.
And I'm Melanie Christopher, and we are joined by Alan Lang with Y'all Politics and Dr. Nathan Schrader with Millsaps College. Now, we have a question for you, and of course it is, who do you think won the debate? Alan, we'll start with you.
It's hard to determine whether or not somebody won or lost. I think you had two candidates coming in wanting to do really different things. You had Tate Reeves wanting to kind of hold serve, I think. He had the vote lead going in. He wanted to stay on the conservative side of things and policy, and I think he did that. I think you had Governor Waller coming in making more of an emotional pitch to conservatives, and I think he made a lot of points along the way, really appealing to people to try to get out of their shell with regards to Medicaid expansion and teacher pay and infrastructure. Dr. Schrader.
Well, I think if you're, similar to what Alan said, I think it depends who you are as a voter and what motivates you as someone thinking about what to do in the runoff next week. So the ideas that we heard from Lieutenant Governor Reeves really had a message that was sort of stay the course, right? His invoking of Phil Bryant, his defense of the Bryant administration. So if you're a voter who's a Republican and you think the state is heading in the right direction, things are going well under Governor Bryant, that message I think would resonate with you. But I did think that the message from Justice Waller was more policy specific. It was more policy priorities. So if you're a voter who's thinking about the potholes on their roads, the teachers, the teacher vacancies in their schools, the lack of school funding, the kind of things we keep hearing on a bipartisan level cut across Republican, Democratic, and Independent voters, I think his message would be one that you would walk away from this feeling that you may have found your candidate.
Alan, how's the runoff impact the Republican Party ahead of the general election?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, this has really been a fight for the soul of the Republican Party in the state of Mississippi. You know, you hear Republicans say, gosh, we don't want campaigns that mudsling and this, that, and the other. This campaign from both sides, you heard them compliment each other. Hey, he's a good guy. I think they both respect each other. These guys just really fundamentally disagree, and the voters, this is going to be a referendum for the party, for the Republican Party of the state of Mississippi. I think it's a really good exercise for the Mississippi GOP.
And Dr. Schrader, what do you think about that? How's it going to play out when we heading into the general election?
I actually think that it's important to point out that the differences within political parties get settled in primaries. That's why we have primaries. We've seen this in Democratic primaries and nationally and within the different states. You see that playing out here. So I do think there's an important thing for voters to take a look, see what is it they really want out of their Republican nominee. I think one of the most important exchanges that we heard tonight was where they each had that opportunity to define what is conservative policy or conservatism for them. And you heard different responses, but I think you heard very heartfelt responses. These were people who have genuine differences, but I think when voters who are conservative Republicans, like many Mississippi Republicans are, that particular exchange, I think, gave them two different impressions. Is which Republican Party do they want to lead, and which Republican Party's voting on the 27th.
Yeah, it's the clearest definition of the night, and it's a question that no one had asked them. You can tell they both kind of took a second to reflect, and then they really attacked that question.
All right.
That's right.
Thank you, gentlemen. One of the big issues, of course, Medicaid expansion. Let's take a listen now and see what the candidates had to say.
I'm opposed to Obamacare expansion. I'm actually the only candidate running for governor this year in either party that is opposed to more Obamacare in Mississippi. I do not believe that putting 300,000 more Mississippians on government health care is a good solution. In fact, I think if you look at what's happened in Louisiana, they elected a Democrat governor in 2015. They soon expanded Obamacare in Louisiana. And there was a study that came out just recently that said in the state of Louisiana, somewhere between 3,000 and 5,000 Louisiana residents are being moved every single month. That's between 40,000 and 60,000 Louisiana residents are being moved from private insurance onto government health care.
What I want to do is put conservative principles in there. We need to incentivize people to work, and that's what this does. The 300,000 people there, it's not Louisiana, this is Indiana and Arkansas. The Brookings Institute's already studied it. It's good for the citizens. It lowers the cost of health care. It would be $1 billion a year to our 115 hospitals, over 60,000 employees at no taxpayer expense. No taxpayer expense. The track record is there. The need is there. We cannot be closing hospitals.
All right, we've heard it again. Dr. Schrader, what do you think about the plans for Medicaid expansion, and how is that going to resonate with the Mississippi voter?
Right. I actually would say that clip that you just played back was what was running through my mind as both the strongest moment of the night, the best moment of the night for Bill Waller, the weakest moment of the night on policy for Tate Reeves. Our own Millsaps Chisholm State of the State polling shows that Mississippi voters favor expanding Medicaid by about 2 to 1, roughly 60-30. I think Bill Waller is sort of talking about something in a way here that is very practical, very pragmatic, resonates with people all over Mississippi, because you inevitably have friends, family, coworkers who are affected by the lack of health insurance. And I think what the reason I say it was a weak moment for Lieutenant Governor Reeves was that, well, clearly he his position is well defined here, but he has not presented really an alternative plan. So you have the Waller presenting sort of his own plan moving forward, but the Reeves position really is a negative one. It's opposed that, but there's not been something else offered up in return that seems to be as solid or as in-depth as what we're hearing from the Waller side.
Alan, what do you think?
Well, I respectfully disagree with my friend Dr. Schrader. You know, for Republican politics, Obamacare is a really, really fundamentally unpopular thing. And you see Waller trying to parse that issue. It's not Obamacare, it's Pence care, it's this, it's that, it's the other state. It is highly unpopular, and I think Tate Reeves is tickled to have the conversation on those terms in a Republican primary. Now, in a general election, maybe that changes a little bit, but right now today, I think he's tickled with his answer, and I think he's tickled to have the conversation on those terms.
Another big topic is infrastructure. That was one of the issues that, you know, is getting a lot of attention across the state. And let's hear what they had to say about infrastructure tonight.
We need to have something that everyone pays for. The unemployed, the drug dealers, the out-of-state motorists, and that's the Ronald Reagan plan. Nobody's ever called Ronald Reagan a liberal. It doesn't add a penny to the national debt. It doesn't add a penny to someone's income tax. It's the fair way to do it.
The 12-cent plan raises gas taxes $240 million. The 4% individual income tax bracket elimination reduces total receipts. Now, these are different groups of people, obviously, but it reduces total receipts by $160 million. So it's a net $80 million tax increase on Mississippians. And Byron, this is really important, because you asked, would this hurt Mississippi families? I was in Mize, Mississippi just not too long ago on the campaign trail. I had a lady come up to me who told me, she looked at me and she said, Tate, I'm going to vote for you because I know you're going to oppose the gas tax. You see, I live in Mize, and I drive to Jackson every day.
Well,
my husband drives to Hattiesburg every single day.
That one
and it's going to cost us an immense amount of money.
All right, all right, so what do you think about their plan for dealing with roads and bridges, Alan?
Yeah, again, I think it's an appeal to the heart of the Republican Party. You know, if you ask somebody, hey, would you pay a little bit more for something? Would you pay a cent or two more? People say, hey, that may not be so bad. If you say, would you pay $400 or $500 a year out of your pocket for better roads and bridges, that doesn't poll as well. And I think that's the question that's the framework that they're trying to ask the question to voters, and I think we're going to know next week.
Yeah, Dr. Schrader, what do you think? Because I mean, voters really realize everything needs to be fixed. It's about how do you pay for it and how much do you pay, right?
Right, that's
kind of
something
the question.
we see consistently, that voters are in agreement that we have this infrastructure problem, the decrepit roads and the bridges that need repaired. But the question comes to how far are they willing to go? I think that Alan's right, that this plays well for Tate Reeves in terms of talking about keeping taxes low. But I also think, again, there's a practical angle here to this, that the Waller campaign is sort of gambling on the idea that Mississippi Republican voters and, you know, Democrats and independent voters may be able to vote in this too if they didn't vote already in the Democratic primary, that voters in general who are left to participate on Tuesday are going to drive down one of those roads with the massive potholes in between now and then. They're going to have to turn their car around and make a U-turn because they've reached one of those bridges they can't pass in their own community. So I think the message that I think that was effective on his side was that this is a problem that you as a voter are going to encounter every day, and that there is a solution to it. The solution is you're going to have to pay some higher gas taxes in order to fix those potholes, bridges, and roads that you drive on a daily basis. But it's our voters in this primary going to respond to both pieces of this message, the problem and the solution as defined by the Waller campaign. We'll see soon, but I think he's gambling on the idea that voters are going to try to link the direct impact in their daily life to what he's saying here.
We've got lots more to talk with you about, but we're going to take a break now. We'll be back in 3 minutes.
Mic check, mic check, mic check, mic check.
And welcome back. Earlier tonight, former Chief Justice Bill Waller Jr. debated against Lieutenant Governor Tate Reeves right here in our studio here at WJTV 12 News.
That's right, and our Gerald Harris is with Waller right now. Gerald.
Byron and Melanie, I'm joined by Justice Waller just a week away until that runoff election. Judge Waller, you wanted to go out there and remind your voters of the 3 issues that you have been running on. That is health care, infrastructure, and education. Did you do that, and did you separate yourself tonight?
Oh, there's no question. This sound bites versus solutions, and I have been very active in advancing my platform from the day that I qualified, the last day of February, and it's been consistent, and we've offered solutions, and I think the voters have said that we need the solutions because over 50% of the voters of this state voted for myself or Representative Foster. We have in similar positions on those 3 major issues because education, health care, roads, and bridges are essential to any community. You don't have any industry, you can't recruit anybody, nobody wants to live there if you don't have it. And the health care, I'm a right-to-life person. I think the health care is a right-to-life issue.
Over the next few days, you have an opportunity to meet with voters to give your solutions to the problems plaguing Mississippians. How are you going to approach that to the runoff Tuesday?
The same way I have. Every person that I meet, almost without exception, is interested in my platform. If I get a chance to explain it, then they vote for Waller. So I'm looking forward to seeing as many voters as I can between now and the election.
What was the highlight of tonight for you?
I think it's just it was a great place for me to be to show my policy positions, that I've got solutions and not sound bites, and I think that the public was able to see that in front of them clearly. The same public that gave Representative Foster and I over 50% support for those positions, and I think would play very well in November, and I think we have to have that for Republicans to win in November.
Thank you so much, Justice Waller. He will be taking on Lieutenant Governor Tate Reeves Tuesday in the GOP runoff for governor. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gerald.
All right, thank you very much, Gerald. We are joined again by our guests, our panelists, Alan Lang with Y'all Politics and Dr. Nathan Schrader with Millsaps College.
You know, one of the issues that we talked about tonight was the issues with the DMV, and they both talked about that a lot. So who do you believe gave, I guess, the best answer to that, or do you think voters were at all satisfied with what they heard from Alan? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, that's, you know, it's easy to not like the DMV, right? Kind of almost no matter where you are. You know, I think it's kind of an easy punching bag. But yeah, I mean, there's obviously been dysfunction there. You saw Michael Watson in the Secretary of State's race make a big issue trying to move that there. I don't think they've gotten a lot of run on that issue with regards to debates or anything else. It just hadn't been talked about a whole lot. I think both candidates handled it well. But again, it's a pretty easy issue to be mad at.
Yeah, Dr. Schrader, what do you think about that issue?
No, I agree that would be an easy target for any candidate in either party primary.
Right.
But this was a place where I was waiting for Justice Waller to take a shot, right? That whether or not you can blame any of this on Lieutenant Governor Reeves, that's not necessarily the point. But he could have made a point of this directly to him tonight. That, well, I'm an outsider. I'm not in office right now, but my opponent is in the current administration. He's lieutenant governor. He presides over the Senate. He should take some responsibility for the failures there. I was sort of waiting for that moment to happen, something like that that sort of passed by.
I think the computer system.
Well, that may have been the closest we got to that, but I was expecting something that maybe voters who don't follow this that closely, that wouldn't have been able to link that computer system, computer contract point to the difference between the candidates. That was just an opportunity where I thought I sensed that there was a chance to differentiate themselves coming there, but it didn't really materialize.
All right. Again, thank you very much. We have more to talk with you about, but again, we're going to take another break, and we will be back again in 3 minutes. Stay with us.
I can hear you. Mic check, mic check, mic check, mic check. It sounded like the same as last time, but I didn't.
And welcome back. Lieutenant Governor Tate Reeves debated against former Chief Justice, Supreme Court Justice Bill Waller Jr. right here in our studios tonight.
That's right, and our Gerald Harris is right now with the Lieutenant Governor on his thoughts about the debate. Gerald?
Yeah, Byron and Mel, less than 1 week until that all-important runoff against Lieutenant Governor Tate Reeves and Justice Bill Waller. Lieutenant Governor Tate Reeves, you wanted to remind the voters out there about your record as Lieutenant Governor. Did you do that, and did you do enough to separate yourself tonight?
Well, I believe that tonight was really about the fact that conservatives believe in less government and conservatives believe in lower taxes. Judge Waller was very clear tonight that he believes in more government, more Obamacare, and higher taxes. And so I think we were very successful in defining who the true conservative was in this race. And so I thought it was a very good night.
Moving forward, you have less than a week to convince voters to show back up at the polls. What is your plan over the next week, and how will you re-energize your base and maybe some that sat at home for the first time?
Well, we're going to continue to travel the state of Mississippi. I'll be in every region of the state over the next several days, talking to voters and trying to earn the vote and earn the support from every single Mississippian. Look, the reality is that tonight we had two good men standing on stage debating each other. The best part about tonight is that there were two people who respected one another that just have a very big disagreement on the issues. We had an issues-based debate in which we defined what a conservative was in our own mind, and we have very different views. I believe in limited government. I believe in less Obamacare. I believe in lower taxes. I've proven that over the years, and I'm going to continue to do that if I'm fortunate enough to get elected governor. And I'm going to use those exact points when I talk to voters over the next 5 or 6 days, trying to encourage them to get back to the polls on August 27th, because the reality is we as Republicans need to nominate a true conservative that will take the fight to Jim Hood in November.
And real quick, what was the highlight for you tonight?
Well, the highlight for me tonight was exactly what I just said, which was the fact that you had two gentlemen on the stage that respect each other, that have very different visions and very different views for the focus of where Mississippi should go. And that's really the highlight to me, is this was an issues-based debate, and neither candidate went after one another personally, and I think that says a lot about our respect for one another.
Thank you so much, Lieutenant Governor Tate Reeves. He will be on the ballot with Justice Bill Waller. That's Tuesday.
All right, thank you, Gerald. And once again, we are joined by Alan Lang with Y'all Politics and Dr. Nathan Schrader with Millsaps College.
And Dr. Schrader, what do you think Tate Reeves needs to focus on as he goes into this runoff election?
Well, I think, and we've talked about this on primary night, I think he's running what I had been referring to as kind of a two-pronged messaging campaign. It's been part of, and we heard some of this tonight, the stay the course piece, right? That if you're happy with Governor Bryant, and Governor Bryant is popular, our polling shows that, and he's trying to remind voters that he is part of the Bryant team. And we saw the endorsement he received from Haley Barbour the other day, that he's trying to, he's the extension of what voters have been getting from the previous two administrations. But the other piece of this is he's been running what I was calling kind of the culture, the conservative culture war campaign, and you didn't hear as much of that tonight, but I think the television ads seem to be, have focused on that, but I think he needs to do what he's been doing. He was the highest vote getter in the first round. He won, was it 78 counties out of 82 in the first round of voting. I think that he's got a plan, and I think he needs to execute and stick to the plan that's got him this far in the race.
Alan, typically particularly Republican leaders don't endorse one candidate over another, particularly like a primary like this. Why do you think former Governor Haley Barbour did that and did that now?
You know, kind of back to the earlier point, I think this is kind of a fight for the soul of the Mississippi Republican Party. The party has grown. It's grown a lot through expansion of Democrats converting to Republicans, and we're now kind of at the first election in a long time where Republicans kind of intra-party have a real choice and are being kind of forced to choose. And I think people that care about the party, from Governor Bryant, Governor Barbour, and other people, and there are a lot of people on both sides who've made endorsements, they are stating a preference because they know it's important. And I think for over the next week or so, I think you're going to look at where the votes are going to come from. You're going to look at what parts of the state. You look at that map that came out earlier. I think it's going to be a big part of where people focus their time.
Thank you very much. Thank you, and thank you for joining us tonight.
Both of you.
Remember, the runoff election is on August 27th, and you can find more information about our election process on our website. It's WJTV.com. Remember to head out to the polls on Election Day. Thank you for joining us on WJTV tonight. Make it a good night, everyone.